Welcome to Cherry Blossom BL Story, where emotions bloom and stories unfold. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's chapter.
For 2 nights he thought he was stealing a secret from a sleeping man, but on the 3rd night he discovered the terrifying truth: the man had been awake the entire time. Chapter 1. The weight of summer. The train station smelled of diesel and cheap coffee, a scent that Leo had come to associate with the liminal space between his life at university and the strange gravity of his family's orbit. He stood on the platform, a single duffel bag slung over his narrow shoulder, his green eyes scanning the crowd for a face he hadn't seen in 3 years. Victor. The name alone sent a shiver down Leo's spine that had nothing to do with the air-conditioned chill of the afternoon. Leo was 21, old enough to know better than to harbor the kind of thoughts he had about his own cousin, yet young enough that desire still felt like a rebellion against the order of things. He adjusted the strap of his bag, aware of how his thin cotton shirt clung to his slim frame, how his pale skin seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to the tan, robust men who surrounded him. Then he saw him. Victor was impossible to miss. At 26, he had grown into the kind of man that seemed carved from marble and then given life, tall, broad-shouldered, with muscles that strained against the fabric of his dark t-shirt. His jawline was sharp, dusted with stubble, and when he smiled, it was with the easy confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. "Leo," Victor called out, raising a hand. Leo's throat went dry. "Hey, Victor." The hug was brief, clinical, the way family members embrace when they haven't seen each other in years and aren't particularly close. Victor smelled like cedar and something darker, masculine, intoxicating. Leo pulled away quickly, feeling the heat rise to his cheeks. "Mom's waiting in the car," Victor said, taking Leo's bag with one hand and clapping him on the shoulder with the other. The weight of that hand, the pressure of those fingers against Leo's collarbone, made his knees weak. "She's been talking about having you over for weeks. Says you need a proper home, cooked meal after eating dorm food." Leo managed a smile. That would be nice. The drive to Victor's house was filled with small talk. Questions about Leo's studies, his major in literature, his plans after graduation. Leo answered automatically, his attention consumed by the way Victor's forearm flexed as he shifted gears, the dark hair that covered his skin, the veins that stood out against the muscle. He wanted to touch that arm, trace those veins with his tongue, feel the power coiled beneath the surface. It was wrong, he knew it was wrong, but since when had desire ever cared about propriety? Aunt Margaret's house was exactly as Leo remembered it, a Victorian-style home with a wraparound porch and too many rooms for a widow and her son. Margaret enveloped Leo in a hug that smelled of lavender and baking bread, chattering about how thin he'd gotten, how he needed fattening up, how wonderful it was to have family around. That night, over roast chicken and potatoes, Margaret made the announcement. "I have to go to Portland for the week," she said, dabbing at her mouth with a napkin. "Your uncle's estate finally needs settling, and there's no putting it off. Victor, you'll look after Leo, won't you? Make sure he doesn't get into trouble." Victor's eyes met Leo's across the table, and for a moment Leo thought he saw something flicker there, something dark and knowing, but then Victor smiled, easy and unaffected. "Of course, Mom, we'll be fine." 7 days, Margaret continued, oblivious to the tension coiling in Leo's stomach. "I'll be back next Sunday. The fridge is stocked, and Victor knows where everything is. Leo, you make yourself at home, understand?" Leo nodded, unable to speak past the sudden rush of blood in his ears. 7 days, 7 nights alone with Victor in this house. The thought was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. After dinner, Margaret retired early, citing her early flight. Leo stood in the guest room, the same room he'd stayed in as a child, though the twin bed seemed smaller now, more confining, and listened to the sounds of the house settling. The old pipes groaned, the floorboards creaked. Somewhere down the hall, Victor was moving around, preparing for bed. Leo lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, his heart hammering against his ribs. The house was quiet now, deeply quiet, the kind of silence that felt like a held breath. He imagined Victor in the master bedroom, imagined him stripping off his clothes, revealing the body that Leo had only glimpsed beneath fabric. The broad chest, the defined abs, the trail of hair leading down from his navel. Leo touched himself, tentative at first, then with growing desperation. He thought about Victor's hands, large and calloused, imagined them on his hips, his waist, his throat. He came with a stifled cry, biting his pillow to muffle the sound, his pale skin flushed and sweating in the summer heat. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of green eyes and rough hands. Chapter 2. The first transgression, the first day, passed in a blur of awkward proximity. Victor worked from home, some kind of consulting job that involved long hours on the phone and spreadsheets that made Leo's eyes glaze over. And Leo tried to occupy himself with the books he'd brought, with walks around the neighborhood, with anything that didn't involve staring at his cousin's body like a starving man at a feast. But it was impossible. Victor moved through the house with an animal grace, unconscious of his own physicality. He stretched in the kitchen, arms above his head, shirt riding up to reveal the hard planes of his stomach. He showered with the bathroom door slightly ajar, steam billowing out into the hallway, and Leo stood frozen outside, listening to the water, imagining the droplets cascading down that muscular back, pooling in the divots of his hips. By nightfall, Leo was wound tight as a spring, every nerve ending raw and sensitive. They ate dinner in near silence, Victor distracted by work emails, Leo unable to focus on anything but the way Victor's throat moved when he swallowed, the way his tongue darted out to catch a drop of sauce at the corner of his mouth. Early night, Victor announced, standing and stretching again, his shirt pulling taut across his chest. "I'm beat. You good here, Leo? Need anything?" Leo shook his head, his mouth too dry to form words. He waited. That was the hardest part, the waiting. He sat in the living room, lights off, watching the minutes tick by on the mantel clock. 11, midnight, 1 o'clock. The house had to be asleep. Victor had to be asleep. At 2 in the morning, Leo finally moved. He wore only his boxers, his pale skin luminous in the moonlight filtering through the windows. His heart hammered so loudly he was certain it would wake the dead, let alone his sleeping cousin, but he had to know, had to feel, had to have this one thing even if it damned him. Victor's bedroom door was open a crack. Leo pushed it wider, wincing at the slight creak of the hinges. The room was dark, curtains drawn, but Leo's eyes had adjusted enough to make out the shape on the bed. Victor lay on his back, one arm thrown above his head, the sheet kicked down to his waist. He was naked from the waist up, and the outline beneath the thin cotton suggested he was naked below as well. Leo approached the bed as if approaching an altar. He could hear Victor's breathing, slow, deep, the rhythm of sleep. Up close, Victor was even more magnificent. The moonlight carved his muscles into sharp relief, highlighting the curve of his biceps, the swell of his pecs, the dark shadows of his nipples, and there, beneath the sheet, the unmistakable shape of his cock, heavy even in rest. Leo's hands trembled as he pulled down the sheet. Victor was indeed naked, his cock thick and uncut, resting against his thigh. Even flaccid, it was impressive, heavy, veined, the head peeking out from the foreskin like a secret. Leo's mouth watered. He wanted to taste it, to worship it, but that would require Victor to be awake, and this was something else. This was theft, taking what he wanted without permission, using his cousin's body while he slept. The thought should have repulsed him. Instead, it made him harder than he'd ever been. Leo removed his boxers, shivering as the cool air hit his overheated skin. He was slim, almost fragile, looking compared to Victor's bulk, his hips narrow, his cock slender and achingly erect. He climbed onto the bed carefully, knees sinking into the mattress on either side of Victor's hips, positioning himself above that sleeping cock. He had prepared himself in the bathroom earlier, fingers slick with lotion, opening himself up with a desperation that bordered on violence. Now, as he lowered himself down, he felt the stretch, the burn, the impossible fullness as Victor's cockhead breached his entrance. Victor didn't stir. Leo bit his lip until he tasted blood, stifling a moan as he sank lower, taking inch after inch of his cousin's cock inside him. It was massive, filling him completely, pressing against places that made his vision blur. When he was fully seated, Victor's hips flush against his ass, Leo had to stop, panting, tears streaming down his face from the sheer intensity of the sensation. Then he began to move. It was a slow, shallow roll of his hips at first, testing, adjusting. Victor's cock dragged against his walls, hitting his prostate with every subtle shift, sending sparks of pleasure up Leo's spine. He grew bolder, rising up slightly before sinking back down, setting a rhythm that was quiet enough not to disturb the sleeper, but deep enough to satisfy the aching need inside him. Leo rode his cousin's cock in the darkness, his pale hands braced on Victor's muscular chest, feeling the heartbeat beneath his palms, the rise and fall of those powerful lungs. He was being split open, filled, claimed by this sleeping giant, and it was the most exquisite torture he'd ever known. His own cock leaked pre-cum onto Victor's stomach, leaving glistening trails on the dark hair there. "Victor," he whispered, the name a prayer and a curse. "Victor, Victor." He came silently, his body seizing, his ass clamping down on Victor's cock as his own spilled onto his cousin's abs. The orgasm was devastating, tearing through him like a storm, leaving him shaking and weak. He collapsed forward, resting his forehead against Victor's chest, breathing in the scent of him, sweat and sleep and something uniquely Victor. For a long moment he stayed there, impaled, spent, listening to the steady rhythm of Victor's heart. Then, carefully, he lifted himself off, wincing at the loss, at the emptiness that followed. Victor's cock glistened in the moonlight, wet with Leo's arousal, but still soft. Leo realized with a distant embarrassment that Victor hadn't come, hadn't even stirred. He pulled the sheet back up, hiding the evidence of his trespass, and crept back to his room, his thighs shaking, his ass tender and used. He fell into a dreamless sleep, the smell of Victor still clinging to his skin. Chapter 3. The second night Leo woke late the next morning, the sun high and hot through his curtains. For a moment he thought the previous night had been a dream, a fevered fantasy born of too much desire and too little sleep. But then he moved, and the soreness between his legs reminded him with vivid clarity exactly what he had done. He found Victor in the kitchen, shirtless, making coffee. The sight of him, casual, domestic, completely unaware, sent a fresh wave of arousal through Leo's gut. "Sleep well?" Victor asked, not turning around. Leo froze, his heart stuttering. "Fine," he managed. "You?" "Like a rock," Victor said, and there was something in his tone, some undercurrent that Leo couldn't identify. "Best sleep I've had in months, actually." Leo poured himself cereal with hands that shook slightly. Victor's back was to him, the muscles shifting beneath the skin as he reached for a mug, and Leo could see the faint scratch marks on his shoulder. Had he done that? He couldn't remember, but the thought that he might have marked his cousin, even accidentally, made his cock twitch in his sweatpants. The day passed in a haze of anticipation. Leo couldn't focus on his book, couldn't taste his lunch, couldn't think of anything but the coming night. He had told himself it was a one-time thing, a moment of weakness never to be repeated. But now that he'd had a taste, now that he knew what Victor felt like inside him, the hunger had become a living thing, gnawing at his insides. He took a long bath in the afternoon, preparing himself again, fingers working lotion into his hole until he was loose and ready. He stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, his green eyes too bright, his pale skin flushed, his brown hair falling into his face. He looked debauched already, used, and the night hadn't even begun. Victor went to bed early, claiming another long day. "Don't stay up too late," he told Leo, and again there was that look, that lingering gaze that seemed to see through Leo's clothes, through his skin, to the dirty thoughts that consumed him. "I won't," Leo promised, though they both knew he was lying. This time Leo waited until 3 in the morning. The house was darker, the moon hidden behind clouds, and Leo navigated by memory and touch. Victor's door was open wider tonight, an invitation or a trap, Leo couldn't tell. He didn't care. Victor was in the same position, on his back, sheet kicked down, naked and vulnerable. But tonight Leo noticed something different. Victor's cock was already half hard, thickening against his thigh, as if his body anticipated what was coming even as his mind slept. Leo didn't hesitate. He was already naked, his cock jutting out from his slim hips, desperate and weeping. He climbed onto the bed, straddled Victor's waist, and sank down in one smooth motion. The stretch was easier tonight, his body remembering, welcoming the intrusion. Victor's cock filled him completely, hot and heavy and perfect, and Leo had to clamp his hand over his mouth to stifle the moan that tried to escape. He rode harder tonight, emboldened by the previous night's success, by the knowledge that Victor slept like the dead, that he could take what he wanted without consequence. He rolled his hips in deep, grinding circles, feeling Victor's cock head drag against his prostate with every movement. The bed creaked softly, the sound obscenely loud in the quiet room, but Victor didn't stir. Leo leaned forward, bracing himself on Victor's pecs, feeling the hard muscle beneath his palms, the coarse hair tickling his fingers. He was close already, his orgasm building fast and hot in his gut. He wanted to kiss Victor, wanted to taste those sleeping lips, but that would be too much, that would cross a line even he wasn't willing to breach. Instead, he contented himself with the feel of Victor's body beneath him, the power coiled in those muscles even in rest, the way his chest rose and fell with steady breaths. Leo fucked himself on that cock, using his cousin for his pleasure, taking what he needed with desperate, rolling thrusts. He came with his teeth buried in his own arm, his ass clamping down rhythmically on Victor's cock, his spend painting Victor's stomach. The pleasure was sharper tonight, more intense, perhaps because he knew what to expect, perhaps because the taboo had lost some of its power and left only the raw, physical need. Leo stayed longer this time, reluctant to pull himself off that perfect cock. He rocked gently, keeping Victor inside him, feeling the pulse of blood in that thick shaft. He imagined Victor waking up, imagined those dark eyes opening, imagined the horror and disgust that would follow. The thought should have terrified him, but instead it sent a dark thrill through his spent body. Eventually he lifted himself off, cleaned Victor's stomach with his own discarded shirt, and crept back to his room. He slept deeply, sated, dreaming of green eyes that watched him from the darkness. Chapter 4, The Intrusion. The third day dawned with a tension that crackled like electricity through the house. Leo moved through the rooms like a ghost, pale and withdrawn, his green eyes avoiding Victor's gaze at every turn. He was wearing a loose sweater that hung off his slim frame, the collar pulled high as if he could hide behind it, and Victor watched him with a hunger that had turned sharp and impatient. At breakfast, Leo barely touched his food. He pushed eggs around his plate, sipped coffee he didn't drink, and flinched when Victor's hand brushed his reaching for the creamer. "Sleep well?" Victor asked, his voice deceptively casual. Leo's cheeks flushed pink, spreading down his throat. "Fine," he mumbled, staring at his plate. "You restless?" Victor said, and let the word hang between them like a blade. Leo fled the table soon after, claiming he had reading to do, essays to plan. Victor let him go, but his eyes followed the sway of Leo's narrow hips, the way he climbed the stairs two at a time as if escaping something predatory. The day crawled. Victor tried to work, staring at spreadsheets that blurred into meaningless numbers, his mind consumed by the absence that had become a presence. 2 nights. For 2 nights, Leo had come to him like a vision, like a dream made flesh, sliding onto his cock with the confidence of a thief and the desperation of a worshipper. Victor had lain still, eyes closed, his body screaming to move, to grab, to flip the boy over and fuck him properly. But he had waited to see how far Leo would go, how deep the obsession ran, but tonight, nothing. Victor stood in his bedroom at midnight, the house silent around him, and felt the absence like a wound. He had expected the door to creak open at 2 in the morning, expected the shift of the mattress, the heat of Leo's body lowering onto him. He had planned to wake up tonight, to catch Leo in the act, to finally claim what was being offered, but Leo hadn't come. The realization gnawed at Victor, a mixture of frustration and concern and something darker, rejection, perhaps, or the fear that Leo had come to his senses, that the shame had finally outweighed the desire. Victor couldn't accept that. He moved through the dark hallway like a shadow, his bare feet silent on the floorboards. Leo's door was closed, but not locked. The click would have been too loud, too final. Victor pushed it open, inch by inch, his heart hammering against his ribs. The room was small, dominated by the narrow guest bed that looked even smaller with Leo curled in its center. Moonlight filtered through the thin curtains, painting everything in shades of silver and blue. Leo lay on his side, facing the wall, his breathing deep and even, the rhythm of sleep or the pretense of it. Victor approached the bed, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. Leo was wearing only a thin t-shirt and boxers, the blanket kicked down to his waist, exposing the pale length of his legs. Even in sleep, he looked vulnerable, his brown hair tousled, his green eyes hidden behind closed lids. Victor stood over him, his cock already hardening in his sweatpants, his hands itching to touch. He had waited 2 nights. He had been patient, playing the sleeping giant while Leo used him for his pleasure, but patience had its limits, and Victor had reached his. He sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. Leo didn't stir. Victor reached out, his hand hovering over Leo's hip, then lower, tracing the curve of his ass through the thin cotton of his boxers. The fabric was soft, worn, and beneath it, Leo was warm and yielding. Victor's fingers slipped beneath the waistband, pulling the boxers down slowly, exposing Leo's pale skin to the night air. Leo shifted slightly, murmuring something unintelligible, but didn't wake. His breathing remained deep, though Victor noticed a hitch now, a slight tremor that suggested consciousness or dreams deep enough to feel real. Victor stood, stripped off his own clothes, his cock springing free, heavy and aching. He climbed onto the narrow bed, the frame creaking under his weight, and positioned himself behind Leo, spooning him from behind. The heat of Leo's body against his own was intoxicating, the slim curve of his back fitting against Victor's broad chest as if designed for it. He pressed his cock against Leo's crease, not entering, just rubbing, grinding, letting Leo feel what was waiting for him. The friction was maddening, the softness of Leo's skin against his hardness, the knowledge that he was so close to being inside that tight heat again. "Leo," Victor whispered against his ear, his breath hot. "Wake up." Leo stirred, his body tensing as consciousness returned. He became aware of the heat behind him, the hard pressure against his ass, the arm that had snaked around his waist to hold him in place. He went rigid, terror and arousal warring in his chest as he realized what was happening. Victor was here, in his bed, hard and naked and pressed against him. "Don't move," Victor commanded, his voice rough with desire. His hand slid down Leo's stomach, cupping his cock through his boxers, finding him already half hard, betraying his body's true desires even as his mind reeled. Victor, Leo gasped, trying to turn, to speak, to explain, but Victor's grip tightened, holding him in place. You didn't come tonight, Victor growled, his teeth grazing Leo's earlobe, his fingers hooked into Leo's boxers, pulling them down further, exposing him completely. Why? Leo's voice broke, tears pricking his eyes. I couldn't. I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. Sorry for what? Victor's hand wrapped around Leo's cock, squeezing just hard enough to make him whimper. His other hand gripped Leo's hip, pulling him back against that hard length. Sorry for climbing into my bed. Sorry for riding my cock. Sorry for using me like your personal toy while I pretended to sleep. Leo sobbed, humiliation burning through him. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Victor. Please. Please what? Victor's thumb traced the head of Leo's cock, spreading the pre-cum that had gathered there. Please stop, or please don't stop. Leo couldn't speak. He was overwhelmed, terrified, more aroused than he'd ever been in his life. Victor's cock was hot against his crease, thick and demanding, and Leo wanted it inside him, wanted it filling the emptiness that had consumed him since he'd decided not to go tonight. Answer me, Leo, Victor commanded, his grip tightening, his hips rolling to grind his cock against Leo's entrance. Tell me what you want. I want. Leo's voice broke. I want you inside me. Please, Victor, please. Victor made a sound, half growl, half groan, and then he was pushing, the head of his cock breaching Leo's hole, sliding in deep and hard and perfect in one relentless thrust. Leo cried out, his head falling back against Victor's shoulder, his body arching as he was filled completely. It was different from the previous nights. Victor was awake, Victor was moving, Victor was fucking him with intent and skill rather than lying passive while Leo used him. The stretch burned, the fullness overwhelming, but it was exactly what he needed, what he'd been craving. Is this what you wanted? Victor asked, his voice rough against Leo's ear. His hips snapped forward, driving his cock deeper, hitting Leo's prostate with devastating precision. Is this why you came to my room? Why you climbed on top of me? Why you fucked yourself on my cock like a desperate little slut? Leo nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face, his body shaking with the force of Victor's thrusts. Yes, yes, God, yes, say it, Victor commanded, his hand wrapping around Leo's throat, not squeezing, just holding, claiming, tell me what you are. I'm. Leo gasped as Victor thrust harder, the bed slamming against the wall. I'm your slut, Victor, I'm yours. Please don't stop, please. Victor didn't stop. He fucked Leo with a relentless rhythm, his cock pounding into that sweet spot over and over, his free hand jerking Leo's cock in time with his thrusts. The room filled with the sounds of their coupling, flesh slapping against flesh, Leo's desperate moans, Victor's harsh breathing. 2 nights, Victor growled. 2 nights you came into my room. 2 nights you rode my cock. Did you think I didn't know? Did you think I was really asleep? Leo's eyes widened, shock cutting through the haze of pleasure. You knew. I've been awake every night, Victor admitted, his hips never slowing. I felt you climb on top of me. I felt you take my cock inside you. I felt you come on my stomach, you little tease, and I let you. I let you use me because I wanted to see how far you'd go, how desperate you were for it. Leo sobbed, the revelation shattering something inside him. All that careful stealth, all that fear of waking Victor, and his cousin had been awake the entire time, feeling every moment, knowing exactly what Leo was doing. Victor, he whimpered, I didn't know, I thought. You thought you were being sneaky, Victor said, his voice thick with amusement and lust. You thought you were taking advantage, but I was enjoying every second, Leo. I was lying there, pretending to sleep, while my little cousin fucked himself on my cock. Do you know how hard it was not to grab you, not to flip you over and fuck you properly? Leo shook his head, unable to process the words, unable to do anything but feel. The stretch of Victor's cock inside him, the rough hand on his throat, the pleasure building in his gut like a storm. Now I'm going to fuck you for real. Victor promised, no more pretending, no more games, just you and me, Leo, just my cock in your tight little ass making you scream. Leo came with a wail that Victor had to muffle with his hand, his body convulsing, his ass clamping down on Victor's cock as he spilled over his cousin's fingers. The orgasm was brutal, tearing through him like a hurricane, leaving him limp and trembling in Victor's arms, but Victor wasn't done. He rolled Leo onto his stomach, pulled his hips up, and drove back into him with a force that made Leo scream into the pillow. "Take it," Victor commanded, his hands gripping Leo's hips hard enough to bruise. "Take my cock, Leo. Take everything I give you." Leo took it. He pushed back against Victor's thrusts, his spent cock twitching against his stomach, his body singing with the abuse. Victor fucked him like a man possessed, his cock pistoning in and out of Leo's stretched hole, the sound of their joining obscene and wet and perfect. When Victor came, it was with a roar that he buried in Leo's shoulder, his teeth sinking into the pale skin there as his cock pulsed, flooding Leo with heat. Leo felt every spurt, every twitch, every pulse of Victor's orgasm, and he knew that this was just the beginning. They collapsed together, Victor's weight pressing Leo into the mattress, their breathing ragged and synchronized. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Victor rolled off, pulling Leo against his chest, and pressed a kiss to his forehead, a gesture so tender it made Leo's chest ache. 7 days, Victor whispered. "We have 7 days, Leo, and I'm going to spend every one of them inside you." Leo closed his eyes, a smile breaking across his face despite the tears still wet on his cheeks. "Yes," he breathed. "Yes, please, Daddy."
That's all for today on Cherry Blossom BL Story. Thank you for watching. What do you think about this chapter? Did you like it, or do you think something unexpected is coming? Comment your thoughts below. And subscribe for more stories.